Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to one of our public lectures this year. Keele University very much values our ability to host events like this, both for our immediate staff and student community, but also to open it up to the broader public in order to facilitate debate in all sorts of ways. And while we recognise that there are many people who are asking the question at the moment of what exactly universities are for, I don't think any of us will deny the fact that one of those key purposes of universities is exactly to provide a forum to hear experts talk about their fields and to allow us to interact in different ways with people from a whole range of different disciplines. Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome the Rt Hon John Bercow MP. John, you will all know in various guises. He's been the MP for Buckingham since the 1997 election. Before that, he had a career in local government in the borough of Lambeth, where for a number of years he was deputy leader of the Conservative opposition group. He's had various roles while he has been in Parliament, not least the front bench spokesman for education and employment, so clearly knows our field very well and is very keen to interact with the higher education community, and in particular with the student community. On top of that, he has been a member of the International Development Select Committee for a number of years, since 2004. And something I certainly didn't know was that he established the all-party group on brain tumours to raise awareness of that particular tumour type. Clearly something that I hold very dearly as the Professor of Cancer Biology. He has a number of honorary degrees from other universities, but you won't get vice-chancellors advertising other universities in talks like this, so I won't mention those. But this does give us an opportunity to profile both what we do at Keele, as I say, for our local and immediate communities, but also to have the debate around very current affairs. So John is going to talk to us about Parliament in a modern age, how it's developing and how it interacts with us as members of the community of the UK. So, ladies and gentlemen, can I introduce the Rt Hon John Bercow MP and ask him to deliver his talk this afternoon? John.
Vice-Chancellor, thank you for the warmth and generosity of that welcome, to which I don't know whether I'm equal, but I shall strive to my level best to avoid disappointing you, or even worse, plunging you into a deep sleep, which would be sad for you and a mark of shame for me. Perhaps I can begin by inquiring, because I always regard this as of the essence, whether you can hear me at the back. There are nods of assent, smiles of encouragement, and a couple of thumbs raised. So I thank you for that, and certainly to the person who's just done so for a second time. It's extremely kind of that young woman to do so. And I would say that it is, on the whole, a more heartwarming start and a great improvement upon the last occasion on which I posed that self-same question to an audience, can you hear me at the back, in which, unfortunately for me, some unhelpful wag replied, yes, but I'll happily change places with someone who can't. So the fact that you didn't say that is extremely encouraging from my point of view. And I do want to say at the outset that it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you, amongst students, amongst members of faculty, amongst, I hope as this is a public lecture, members of the community who take an interest in the university or the discussion of topics of potential interest to them and wider interest to the public. And in front of the illustrious representative of the chain gang with his mayoral chain around him, I say thank you, sir, amidst your busy schedule, for taking the time out to be here, and thank you in appreciation, because I always say we say thank you too rarely and ought to do so more often, for what you do for your community to seek to make life better for its citizens. Perhaps I can be allowed, Vice-Chancellor, also to reference Paul Farrelly, local Member of Parliament, serving Member of Parliament now for well nigh 17 years, who is legendarily independent-minded, fights for what he believes in, took a leading role in questioning and scrutinising and challenging and probing and holding to account News International at the time of the phone hacking scandal. And that's what members of Parliament are supposed to do, not just to sit there, not just to vote with the party, not just to operate on some sort of pre-programmed basis, but to question, to probe, to scrutinise, to challenge, to contradict, to hold to account the government of the day for errors of omission or of commission. And I've just come into contact again after a gap of a couple of years with my old friend Joan Whalley, who hasn't in any meaningful sense retired. She stood down as a Member of Parliament, but to say she retired would be to do violence to the English language and very likely to result in incurring a lawsuit from her, because I'm not sure that Joan ever intends to retire. Great champion of the environment, champion of all things Stoke, champion of her constituency to the extent that when I last visited there, and I remember speaking to the Kidstone Youth Parliament, I was left in no doubt of the affection and esteem in which she was held by local people. And then I see right in front of me, directly in my line of vision, Paul Clark, Member of Parliament for several years for Gillingham. Again, a hugely active force in the House during his time as a Labour Member of Parliament. I love universities, ladies and gentlemen. I actually went with Jeremy Lefroy just now to learn about Housing First and the very real efforts being made on a multi-agency basis to tackle the spike in homelessness and rough sleeping in and around Stafford, an initiative that has had marked results in reducing the number of rough sleepers and finding pathways not just to people ceasing to be homeless, but to people being enabled to chart a new course for themselves in their lives in terms of work, of training, of tackling addiction, and so on. But thereafter, it was always the intention, of course, to come here and later to go on to North Staffordshire University. And I do want, if I may, as somebody who was the first in my family fortunate enough to go to university, not the first who would be able to benefit, but the first who was fortunate enough to do so, to congratulate Keele University on all it's achieved over half a century and more. The biggest single campus university in the United Kingdom, with a miscellany of stellar, independently, externally validated achievements to its credit. Specifically, I think, if you look at those external markings, because no person or institution can be judged in his or her or its own cause, I think it tells a story, Vice-Chancellor, of which you and your senior leadership team, colleagues, and all of faculty and students can be very proud. Consistently, massively highly ranked for student experience, for student satisfaction, and for student satisfaction with course chosen and undergone. And no wonder, therefore, that Keele is consistently much nearer to the top of the rankings, in some particulars and in given years at the top of the rankings, than it is towards the bottom. So congratulations on what you do. Thanking you for allowing me to be amongst your number. I'd like to treat of my theme. Just before doing so, I want, if I may, to treat of one quite sensitive matter, which I fear your natural courtesy will probably disincline you to raise with me directly, but which, if unaddressed, will lurk mischievously, and perhaps from my vantage point, perilously in the undergrowth, and that is the sensitive matter of height. Very specifically, it has been bruited in some of the more down-market parts of the press that I'm the shortest man ever to be Speaker of the House of Commons. Vice-Chancellor, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, let me say to you with all the force and rhetorical insistence at my command that there's nothing wrong with being short. On the law of averages, the great likelihood is that a proportion of you, I know not who because you're seated, will share that characteristic of vertical challenge with me. We may be short, but we may also be perfectly formed. In any case, I'm probably making, my friends, a virtue of necessity. I have always been short. I'm now 55 years old and I remain short, and given the known impact of the ageing process upon physiognomy, the overwhelming probability is that I shall become inexorably and irrevocably shorter still over a period of time. And about the fact of that continued and soon to be exacerbated shortness, I'm as intensely relaxed as Peter Mandelson once famously, or in some people's minds infamously, said that New Labour was intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich. But I'm not intensely relaxed about the matter of historical accuracy. You'd expect the Speaker, forsooth, to have done his research, and if in no other respect, I hope at least in that respect, not to disappoint you, I have done. And it's quite wrong, simply as a matter of historical fact, when some of these more down-market scribblers say, oh, well, Bercow's the shortest man ever to be Speaker. Sir John Bussey, Speaker of the House, from 1394 to 1398, Sir John Wenlock, Speaker from 1455 to 1456, and Sir Thomas Tresham, Speaker of the House in 1459, are all believed to have been shorter than I am. Although I do have to admit that this was true only after all three of them had been beheaded. Indeed, no fewer than 7 of my predecessors met their end on the executioner's block. One was killed in battle, and a further poor unfortunate soul was brutally murdered. So you will understand that this does enable me to view the woes and challenges which afflict and confront the House of Commons, and which in all candour periodically afflict and confront me, with an appropriate sense of historical perspective. That is to say, whatever else happens to me, I am not likely to lose my head, and I'm genuinely delighted to be with you. I would like, if I may, to address 3 points which might give you some entree or insight into the role of the Speaker. First, the best known and most visible function of the Speaker is to chair in the chamber. And in order to underscore the expected, nay, insisted upon impartiality or neutrality of the Speaker in the chair, which is the best known and most visible function of the Speaker, it has long been a requirement of the occupant of the office that he or she becomes, as soon as elected Speaker, independent of, unconnected with, owing no allegiance to, and expressing no support for any political party. In order to do that, in terms that brook of no uncertainty or contradiction and allow no scope for doubt, I resigned my membership of the Conservative Party on the 22nd of June 2009 when I became Speaker, so that I could be seen to be, not just be, but be seen to be separate from party politics. You eschew party politics. You have no further involvement in party politics, and you are, by way of being a referee or an umpire, in the sense that your role is to keep order, encourage people to take part, and try to cut down on the number of people who have to be excluded altogether as a result of bad behaviour. So you can see immediately where the analogy with a referee or an umpire, or perhaps even with the head teacher of a school, applies. That is what I seek to do. Of course I have to have, not just in a modern parliament, but I would have had to have in any parliament, a knowledge of colleagues. And so I suppose the first prerequisite of a Speaker is to know who all his or her 649 colleagues are, to which political parties they belong, and preferably which constituencies they represent. Now, I could seek, Vice-Chancellor, to hoodwink you into thinking that that is a gargantuan, challenging, almost incomparably difficult task. I won't. I won't make that effort for 2 reasons. First of all, because it would be disingenuous. And secondly, because you're quite an auspicious and cerebral bunch here, and you would not be hoodwinked. You'd see through me, and you'd realise that actually it's not very difficult. 400 or more of my colleagues are known to me. I've served in previous parliaments with them, so I know who they are and to which party they belong and which area of the country they represent. The challenge is learning the new ones, and the House of Commons officials produce a book within a very, very, very small number of days of the general election, with pictures of the new members, names of the new members, party affiliation of the new members and constituencies of the new members. And in 2010, for example, when there were 227 new members, I learnt approximately 25 or 30 a day for about 8 days, duly tested by my wife. So I know who everybody is, and of course we all make mistakes from time. To err is human, but colleagues are entitled to expect that the Speaker knows who everybody is. Now, in deciding who to call to speak, how does the Speaker go about it? Answer, some of it is preordained, because there is a daily ballot, ladies and gentlemen, for question time, and that ballot is independent of the Speaker. That ballot is electronically conducted and has nothing to do with me. And people who are successful in that ballot, in that they are ranked in the first 15 or so of questioners, will be called by the Speaker to ask their question, whether the Speaker would otherwise be minded to call them or not. They have a right to ask their question. But if ever you watch Parliament, you may see that there are people constantly standing up. And people often around the country, in all sorts of situations, say to me, why is it people are constantly standing up in Parliament, either at question time or during a debate? To which the answer, ladies and gentlemen, students, academics, visitors to this lecture theatre, standing up in the chamber of the House of Commons during question time is analogous to putting your hand up if you're in an audience in a lecture theatre or a classroom at school or at a public meeting. It's a means by which to signal a desire to take part in the discussion. And in Parliament we use the term seeking to catch the Speaker's eye. So in deciding who to call to speak, I am looking from one side of the House to the other. I'm looking to call new members as well as those who've been around for several decades. I'm looking to call women who on the whole are better behaved as well as men. I'm looking to call colleagues from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well as from England and from different parts of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And on key controversies, not perhaps on every issue, on key controversies, for example, Brexit or Israel-Palestine, it is expected that the Speaker will know from which vantage point a colleague is coming. I have to know, on each side of the House, who stands in the pro-Brexit or the anti-Brexit camp, or the pro-Israel or pro-Palestine camp. I use that knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, as a fair-minded and competent Speaker should, not in order to advance the articulation of one viewpoint and to retard the expression of another, but rather to seek to facilitate the fullest and fairest expression of opinion which exists in the House, subject to the overriding caveat and constraint of time. Can I please everybody? Oh, august bunch assembled here at the University of Keele. What are those pigs I see flying in front of my very eyes? It's completely impossible to satisfy everybody. There is a smattering of colleagues who are entirely convinced that there is no debate that would not be improved by a speech from them of enormous erudition and almost certainly of equal length. And they fail to understand what could possibly explain the almost insane but certainly irrational judgment of the chair upon that particular occasion that they should not be called. I am called to mind of one particular opposition member who is a first-class member of Parliament, incredibly assiduous and has been for decades, whom I once called in 2 of the first 3 question time sessions, but not in the 3rd, whereupon he sidled up to the chair politely but robustly to remonstrate that I had censored him. And he couldn't understand it. And I said, I beg your pardon, I called you on each of the first 2 question times, to which he rather disarmingly replied, oh yeah, but I wasn't bothered about those. It was the third that mattered. And I said, well, call me quaint and excuse the fact that I am not psychic, but I rather thought that as you stood up on each of those first 2 occasions, you had some interest in putting an inquiry to the executive, or alternatively, or as well, favouring the House and possibly Yorkshire and conceivably the nation with your views. Little was I to know that it was all play acting, whereupon amazingly he persisted and said, yeah, but I still don't understand, Mr. Speaker, why you didn't call me, to which I replied, others. To which he replied, I don't follow you. And I said, the existence of other honourable and right honourable members who also wish to take part. To which he responded, oh yeah, but I feel really strongly about this subject. And I said, yes, it's funny you should say that. That might just conceivably be true of other people who are also seeking to catch my eye. I say that fondly of the colleague concerned, because he's actually a first-class member. But sometimes colleagues are so focused, so preoccupied, so driven by their principles or their people, which is to their credit, that they're not always completely mindful of the existence of others who are similarly motivated. For long periods of our history, the Speaker was really expected to do that, to chair in the chamber competently, to select amendments for debate and vote on legislation, to keep order, and not to do much besides. However, there have been times, as the historical works of Linda Colley, with which some of you may be familiar, testify, when perhaps the Speaker in a given Parliament, in a particular set of circumstances, has been expected to do more than that. And this is what causes me to put to you a second proposition, which I hope is of some interest. And that is that the Speaker can, and from time to time also should, be the catalyst for, or the facilitator of, necessary, desired, and perhaps overdue change. When I stood for election as Speaker in 2009, it was in the immediate aftermath of the reputational carnage inflicted by the expenses scandal, and there was a general recognition amongst colleagues, including amongst the 10 candidates for the speakership, that change had to be visited upon us. I use that formulation of words advisedly. Not configured by us, change had to be visited upon us so that antiquated, secretive, generous, brackets overly close brackets, indefensible arrangements for the reimbursement of costs incurred in the discharge of duties would be replaced by a set of arrangements characterised by equity, transparency, audit and accountability. But more particularly, those arrangements had to be determined independently of us and applied to us. Now, that wasn't easy, but most of us accepted the principle that that had to happen. But I remember arguing, as perhaps Joan and Paul do, and Paul Clark here, the thesis that if anybody thought that all that was needed for Parliament to start to recover a little in public esteem after perhaps decades of being somewhat undervalued was to replace an old-fashioned expenses regime, I felt that such a colleague was deluded on an industrial scale. My proposition, which was shared by others, was that the problem was deeper, ladies and gentlemen. I felt when I stood for election in 2009 that the power of government under successive administrations had grown, was continuing to grow, and needed to be reduced, of which the corollary was that the power of Parliament had decreased, was continuing to decrease, and needed to increase. I felt that there was, if you will, a disequilibrium, a lack of symmetry in our political system, a patent imbalance whereby the executive branch, as we call it, the decision makers, those who held office and made policy and spent public money and governed, was too great, and the power of the legislature to check, to probe, to scrutinise, to challenge, to contradict, to hold ministerial feet to the fire was too weak. And so I said, look, I can do a bit on my own if you elect me, and the rest we'll have to do together. For a start, let's speed up question time. It's too slow. And I have tried to speed up question time and to facilitate more backbench members taking part, which sometimes I know means saying to people, you've got to be briefer, you've got to ask a shorter question. And I sometimes say to a minister, forgive me, we've got a lot of questions to get through. The abridged rather than the War and Peace version would be appreciated. The minister can always put the longer version in the library and colleagues can consult it in the long summer evenings which lie ahead. But we've got 20 questions to get through. So I've tried to speed up question time. Forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, I always say, Paul and Joan might have heard me say this before, it's not for me to say, Vice-Chancellor, colleagues, it's not for me to say whether I'm a good speaker or not. That's for you and other people to judge, and I'm happy to rest content with people's verdict. I obviously feel I can do the job, and presumably the House does, otherwise it wouldn't have elected me and then re-elected me 3 times since. But as to whether I'm good or not, that really is for other people to say. What I suppose I'm arguing to you, part of my thesis today, is that I have sought to do what it said on the tin. I promised to speed up question time, and just as a matter of fact, we get through, statistically, very considerably more questions than we used to do. I said to colleagues, I think it is ridiculous, this was in 2009, that urgent matters which have just arisen, which are the subject of controversy about ministerial conduct, government policy, controversial legislation, changes in policy, dealing with crises that have arisen, cannot be aired on the floor of the House because the government basically controls the timetable. And the government won't volunteer to come and deliver what we call a ministerial statement, an explanation on an awkward matter, if it is inconvenient. But surely there has to be a safety valve for Parliament. We cannot simply have Parliament dictated to, imposed upon by the executive. And so I said to colleagues, look, don't forget there's a thing called the UQ, the capital U urgent, capital Q question, provided for in our standing orders, which by 2009 had fallen into desuetude. Very few applications were made. And I said, look, if you elect me, I'm going to revive the urgent question. If colleagues apply to the Speaker under our standing orders for permission to put an urgent question, and I think it's urgent, not just UIMOM, urgent in mind of member, but genuinely urgent, well, then I'm inclined to select it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you that we've had 451 urgent questions since I was elected. In my first year, I granted 24 as distinct from 2 in the previous 12 months. Now, that's not the Speaker saying the government's wrong on the issue. It's not the Speaker saying the government's right on the issue. That's not for the Speaker to say. That's the whole point. It's the Speaker saying this is a matter that warrants the attention of the House of Commons today. And so what I've tried to do is to facilitate Parliament. And it might be a question about a change in NATO strategy that I once granted to a Tory MP called John Barron, much to the irritation of the Defence Secretary at the time. Or it might be an urgent question about cuts to the BBC World Service, which was raised a few years ago, about which there was intense interest. Or it might be an urgent question about the circumstances in which and the process by which Toby Young was appointed recently to an important public position. Following that scrutiny in that case, that appointment was rescinded. So I suppose what I'm saying to you is these are real and live exchanges on important matters, acting as a magnet to the chamber for backbench members who'd previously given up hope of being able to raise anything topical, so they wrote a blog or did a radio interview or popped off to a television studio. Now there's a reason to come to the chamber. And as far as ministers are concerned, well, ministerial feet are held to the fire. And if I may say so, in a scrupulously non-partisan way, I'll identify to you just 2 examples, one from each side, of ministers who've never complained about UQs that I've granted. When Labour was in office, Jack Straw never complained. Jack was a pro. Jack was both executive man and a good parliamentarian. Jack saw it as his duty to account to the House. And if I decided something needed to be answered by him, he would come to the chamber and answer and make no complaint. And under the present government, Michael Gove, not my longest standing friend. I've had my differences with Michael. I haven't always agreed with him or he with me, but he is intellectually powerful. He has tremendous self-confidence. He's a very good performer in the chamber, and he never complains. I granted an urgent question about the fishing deal the other day, which was a matter of great controversy, particularly in some constituencies and particularly amongst Brexiteers. Not a question of whether the deal was right or wrong, the policy good or bad, the Secretary of State in the lead on the matter and doing well, or not in the lead on the matter, or not a matter for the Speaker to decide. The issue was, should it be aired in the chamber? My view was, look, this is being discussed all over the media, it's being talked about in the Dug and Duck, it's the subject matter of discussion, no doubt, across the dinner table, and in a miscellany and other fora. If it's not debated in the House of Commons, it will create or reinforce the impression that we are completely out of touch. And I want us to be in touch and to be discussing what you're discussing and what other people are discussing and what the media are discussing. So that's the major change I've tried to make. I've tried to encourage the development of the work of the Backbench Business Committee, which I championed the establishment of in 2010, and which now stages regular debates on important issues. The debate it staged on whether to have a referendum on Europe eventually led to a change in Conservative policy in favour of a referendum. Now, whether that was a good thing or a bad thing is a matter of opinion, but that debate brought about a change. The debate on the Hillsborough disaster led to a sequence of events when Theresa May was Home Secretary, which brought about a fundamental reconsideration of the historic explanation, historic and historically wrong, historically cruel, historically disgraceful explanation of how the deaths of the 96 football fans in that stadium came about. It was always blamed on the fans by the police and by the Sun newspaper. That Hillsborough debate in Backbench Business Committee time, led by Steve Rotherham and by people like Maria Eagle and Alison McGovern, brought about change which ultimately will result in prosecutions and the possibility, ladies and gentlemen, of closure for some of the families who have been bereaved and for so long justifiably aggrieved by the way in which those events were reported and judged in the media and the public square more widely. And the debate on mental health in backbench time led to a number of MPs sharing their own experiences of mental health challenge, which I think provided real encouragement to people outside the House. So that's another change towards a more modern, inquisitorial, challenging, dynamic, unpredictable, interesting, vibrant Parliament that my colleagues and I have tried to bring about these last 8 years. We now have elected deputy speakers. They used to be appointed by the parties. We have select committee chairs now elected by secret ballot of the whole House. And I put it to you that the fact that those select committees now, be it DCMS, be it the Treasury Select Committee, be it the Public Accounts Committee, not least under the brilliant chairmanship in the last Parliament of Rt Hon and now of Meg Hillier, the greater assertiveness of those committees is not unrelated to, but I would argue is almost certainly a consequence of their independence. And their independence is underscored by the fact that their chairs are elected by secret ballot of members of the whole House, and their members are elected by party caucus. So the days when they were appointed by the whips are gone. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a role for whips. There is a role for whips in a political system, just as in any public health system you need sewers. But it is quite important that the whips know their place. I mean, I always had a relationship with my whips when I was a Conservative MP, characterised, Vice-Chancellor, by trust and understanding. I didn't trust them and they didn't understand me. You do need whips, but the whips should not be making these appointments. And the thrust of my thesis to colleagues back in 2009 was, look, it's no good people coming up to me saying, oh, John, I really agree with your proposal that Parliament should be modernised and the rights of backbenchers should be strengthened. You know, all power to your elbow, mate. You know, I can't say anything myself because I'm, of course, parliamentary private secretary to the junior minister at MAF, or DEFRA as it was. But, you know, I'm right behind you. I said to colleagues, look, ultimately, if we are ever to be treated with respect, we're going to have to show some self-respect. We've got to get off our knees and not just accept what is handed to us as crumbs from the table by the government of the day. Members of Parliament have got to assert themselves, and that is what I think colleagues increasingly on both sides of the House are now doing. My final point to you is this. When I stood for election as Speaker, I said, look, I'll do all the traditional duties of the Speaker. I'll chair in the chamber. I will try to facilitate a stronger, more assertive Parliament. I'm determined to build a nursery in this place rather than settling for having no nursery but a shooting gallery. Now I'm pleased to say, have no shooting gallery, but we have a very successful nursery. I also said to people, I'm determined to have an education centre in Parliament, which we now have, a digital, high-tech, interactive, state-of-the-art, cutting-edge facility which is allowing us more than to double the number of young people who can come to Parliament to learn about the journey to the rights and representation that we enjoy today. But I say, colleagues, I propose, if you'll forgive me saying so, if you elect me, to do one other thing, and that is, I propose, with your concurrence, you have to operate with the consent of colleagues, whilst preserving the impartiality of the office of Speaker, to be an ambassador for Parliament and a robust advocate of democratic politics who gets out beyond the estate, visits schools, visits colleges, visits universities, visits faith groups, visits voluntary sector organisations, visits public sector institutions to talk about the role of the Speaker and the functioning of Parliament and the importance of democracy, why it all matters. And I said to colleagues, if I'm elected, I am determined to chair the proceedings of the UK Youth Parliament on a non-sitting Friday in the chamber of the House of Commons each year. And I said I wanted to do that because if we want to be respected by young people, we must show respect for young people. Respect is not our automatic right, it's an earned credit. And what better way can we show that encouragement if we want to offer that encouragement than for the Speaker to be present? John Bercow isn't important at all. I'm not important at all, other than, I hope to my own wife and family, but the office of Speaker is important. And I thought it would perhaps send a signal of interest in and care for those young people. I have done the chairing of the Youth Parliament every year since 2009, and I've gone to the UKYP conference every year, wherever it's taken place in the UK, every year since 2009. Invited, I hasten to add. I mean, I don't sort of picket them. I don't turn up and bang on the door and holler and demand to be let in. They do kindly invite me, and I regard that as a great honour and a privilege. But when I started out as Speaker, no names, no pack drill, about 6 months in, quite a senior colleague, I won't say who, and I won't say whether he's even still a member of the House of Commons, of an aristocratic bent, came up to me in the chair. He was very hesitant that day, and he said to me, Mr. Speaker, sir, I didn't vote for you. And now, believe me, I didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot to have worked this out. It was blindingly obvious to me this fellow wouldn't have voted for me in a million years for all sorts of reasons with which I won't bore you. He said, I didn't vote for you. I voted for Sir George Young because I think he's a bloody good egg. But I'm bound to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm bound to say that even though I didn't vote for you, I think you're doing jolly well, if I may say so. Well done. Very well done. You're doing jolly well in standing up for the rights of the House, right to question ministers and so forth. It's absolutely right. Bloody well done. He said, but can I just make my point? I just want to make my point. And I said, yes, please do make your point. So he said to me, well, Mr. Speaker, I'm bound to say, I think this outreach business of yours, sort of visiting schools and colleges and sort of village halls and so forth. I think it's a rum business. Rum business. If you've ever read the works of P.G. Wodehouse, you'll know the meaning of the word rum. It means sort of odd, strange, curious, inexplicable. I don't know. Look up the dictionary definition. So I said, well, forgive me, I don't quite follow you. What do you mean, rum? And he said, well, why is it strange? And he said, Mr. Speaker, I have very considerable experience of this place, as I'm sure you know, my family, very long connections with this establishment. I said, no, I'm perfectly well aware of that. What I'm driving at is, what's your point? And he said, well, I mean to say, I think quite honestly, trudging around the country, going to some bloody balmy village hall, or, speaking to some group of school students, whatever. He said, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, frankly, it's rather below stairs. I mean, the expression below stairs is an incredibly snobbish expression. You know, where are the servants? I said, rather below stairs. He said, quite frankly, sir, if people want to know what the Speaker does, they bloody well come to the House of Commons and watch the Speaker in the chair doing his duty. And they can listen to the debates and so forth. He said, but I really think a man who holds your high office shouldn't be buggering off to go to schools and universities and so forth. I think it's beneath the dignity of the office, he said. So I said, well, I completely disagree with you. I respect you being direct with me. He didn't say it behind my back. He came up to me and said, John, I don't think you should be doing this. Mr. Speaker, I don't think you should be doing this. But I said, I completely disagree with you. We're in a different age in which people who hold public office have got to make a case and explain what they do and talk to and hear from and be ready to be probed by other people. And that's what I am about doing. So my successors will no doubt do things differently. They'll probably do some things that I don't do. They probably won't do some things that I do because we're all a bit different. I very much doubt we'll go back to the age in which the Speaker was almost institutionally incarcerated within the contours of the Palace of Westminster, rarely, if ever, to venture beyond them. So I hope I've told you something about what I do, how it has evolved in terms both of reform within the chamber and trying to develop a more modern parliamentary estate with a nursery and an education centre and better quality public services, a more diverse staff profile, which I've worked hard to establish. And I've tried to give you some explanation about which you might otherwise be unknowing but still a bit puzzled as to why it is that I come to places like Keele University. For me, communication is fun. I like meeting people. It's an honour to do what I do. I don't know whether I'm any good at it, but all I know is that if I were to die tomorrow, for which I have no current plans, you'll be pleased to know, I would die happy, feeling I've been lucky to do for a living what I enjoy and have the chance to give a public lecture at this really fine and esteemed university, still innovating, still striving to improve, still looking to go the extra mile, because you either advance or regress, you can't stand still, is something that I will always treasure and for which I'll always be grateful. And with that, notwithstanding the extraordinary courtesy and forbearance that you have displayed and the longest period of quiet I have ever known Paul Farrelly or Joan Wally observe, you will in truth be relieved beyond words, ladies and gentlemen, to know that my speech is definitively at an end. Thank you very much.